OMG, we moved to Amsterdam and realized we have to hot neighbors, so we decided we want to become friends with them. We didn't have their phone number, so we put a little sign on our window. OMG, they replied.
I'm sorry for fidgeting.
Let's be brave.
Fidgeting's what
Hopefully
I do.
they don't think we are
one
weird.
of these days you stole my
OMG, they
fish,
opened their window and want to talk. What's that? Wanna come over? They invited us over. Should we go? I don't want to be kidnapped. Never mind. No risk, no fun. Follow for part 2. As you know, we moved to Amsterdam and realized we have to hot neighbors. We wanted to become friends with them, so we put little signs on our window. And OMG, they replied and even invited us over. We were kinda scared to be kidnapped, but still went. Luckily, we weren't kidnapped, and they were super nice. They taught us how Dutch people chug beer in under 3 seconds. And we danced and played Mario Kart until 3 am. Should we ask them on a date? Follow for part 3.
Storytime. A girl named Akira Kendrick sent me the story, and the background of it is that her dad was very abusive to her mother, and her mother got custody of Akira, and her dad was not happy about that. Anyway, so Akira was with her aunt and her cousins at her grandmother's house, all on her mother's side, and her dad stops by to say hello. And Akira's outside playing with her cousin, and her dad comes up to her and grabs her arm and says, "Do you want to go to Walmart with me?" And at the time, she's only 7, so all she hears is toy aisle, so she says, "Yes, let's go." So they get in the car, they head to Walmart, she gets some really nice pom-poms, and then he says, "Okay, let's go back to your grandmother's house." So he starts driving and he gets on the highway, and Akira knows that her grandmother's house is right around the corner from Walmart, so he does not need to get on the highway. So she says, "Dad, where are we going?" And he gets really mad and says, "Shut up, sit down, it does not matter." So Akira's in the back seat, she's really scared, and she just shuts her mouth. So after being in the car for a while, they eventually arrive at this really old, abandoned, beat-up house. And when they walk in, Akira sees about 25 people, and she does not know anyone. Her dad brings her to a room, puts her in a little closet, throws her some toys and her pom-poms, and says, "Play." Part 2 of Akira's dad literally kidnapping her. So when they get to the house, Akira is really scared. She doesn't know any of these 25 people. Her dad brings her to a room, throws her in a closet, puts some toys in there, and says, "Play." So after about an hour of being in a little closet with some toys, she finally decides to get up and go look for her dad. So she opens the door and starts looking around, and there is no one in the house. There is not even a single trace of somebody ever being there. So of course she starts freaking out and crying. She doesn't know where she is. She's so far away from her grandmother's house, and she doesn't have a phone. And so eventually, after 3 hours, she hears somebody. She looks up, and her dad is standing there, and he says, "Come on, let's go. The cops are outside." So basically, Akira's aunt called the cops, and they had a search warrant for him. They ended up finding her dad, and they said to him, "If you don't take us to her, you will go to jail." And obviously, from what I just said, he finally took them to her at this random old abandoned house, and they found her. And they ended up putting him in jail anyways, because why not? 2 years in jail and 1 year on probation. Don't steal children, people. Don't. Storytime Tinder edition. Okay, the story blew up on Twitter like a while ago, but I'm just gonna retell it because it's very informational. So there was this guy and this girl, and they met through Tinder, and then they met up and they went on a date. And they were out at dinner, and then she starts not feeling so well. And then she says, "I really need to go home." And he says, "Yeah, I'll drive you home." And she says, "Okay." So then they get to her house, and then she starts feeling better. So then she says, "Do you want to come in for some coffee?" And then he says, "Yeah, sure." So they go inside, they have their coffee, and then she doesn't feel well again. And she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't feel well again. I think you really need to leave." And he's like, "Okay." And he leaves. And then she goes to bed, and in the middle of the night, she wakes up, and she hears this noise down in the kitchen. And so she locks the door, and she calls the cops. And the 911 operator is on the line saying, "Can you just stay on the line until the cops get there?"
Thursday,
and then the cops get there,
Friday,
and they're like, "The door is locked.
Saturday,
Like, we don't think anyone's inside."
Sunday.
And she's like, "I promise you, someone's inside my house. I can hear them." She says, "You have my permission to break down the door." So she's still up in her room, and then she hears the cops break down the door, and then she hears some rustling and some fighting. Part 2 of the Tinder story. So then after the cops break down the door, they go upstairs and they knock on her door, and they're like, "It's okay, we've got the guy, everything's fine." And they say to her, "We don't really want you to stay here tonight. We don't think that you should see what he's done." And when I say he, it's the guy that she went on a date with. And she's like, "No, I need to see what he's done." So she goes downstairs and she sees her kitchen wrapped all in plastic, and there's a saw and a hammer and a knife. And earlier when he came into her house for coffee, he set his keys down right next to her keys. And so when he left, he picked up both sets of keys. And that is how he got back into her house. And they tested her, like her blood and everything, and she wasn't supposed to wake up because of how many drugs were in her system, because on the date he drugged her. And then I guess he was just planning on chopping up her body in her own kitchen. I don't know. Stay safe.
Here's a story time of how me and my sisters almost got kidnapped.
So my mom and her boyfriend were just going to go out and have a night to themselves, and I was home watching my two little sisters. At the time, I was 13, my two little sisters were 9 and 6. So around 6 p.m., my mom and her boyfriend leave. Me and my sisters just sit down and watch a movie, and then I get up to make them dinner. I get paranoid really easily, and while I was making them dinner, I look out the kitchen window, and I thought I seen somebody in the backyard. I text my mom and she gets on the cameras that are outside and she said nobody was out there. I continue making them dinner, we sit down and eat, and then we start watching another movie. Then we start hearing knocking. It wasn't coming from any of the doors, it was coming from the side of the house. I didn't want to bother my mom on her one night out, so I just took the kids and we went upstairs and watched a movie in my room. My 6-year-old sister at the time went to the bathroom and she came back in literal tears. She was literally crying so hard until I finally got her to stop and tell me what was wrong. She said as she was walking back from the bathroom, she seen somebody downstairs. I quietly locked my door and I put my sisters in the closet and I call my mom right away. I'm running out of time. Part 2 of how me and my sisters almost got kidnapped. I called my mom and then she looked on the cameras downstairs and somebody was in the house. She never told me what the person was doing. I guess she just didn't want me worrying, but she called 911 right away. While my two little sisters were in the closet, my 6-year-old sister would not stop crying and I'm pretty sure the person downstairs heard her. At this time, my mom and her boyfriend were already on the way and so were the police. I heard him coming up the steps, so I quietly opened the closet door and promised my sisters that they would stay quiet and be calm no matter what. I didn't know what he was here for, so I hid in the side of the bed in front of the closet so that he would get to me before he got to the girls. I heard him just rummaging through stuff and stuff breaking. Then a couple minutes later, I hear the police sirens. Right as I hear the police sirens, I hear a bedroom window smash. While trying to stay as calm as I can, 3 policemen bust down the door. They grab me and my sisters and take us outside. About 5 minutes after they take us outside and put us in the back of their car, my mom and her boyfriend shows up. About 20 minutes later after he was caught, they did notify us that he was wanted for murder of 2 younger girls and 1 adult male. About $10,000 of our stuff was either missing or broke. Then about a month later when we were capable to, we did move. Nothing has happened since.
This is why you should never knock on a stranger's door. Once there was a man trying to check into a hotel. The woman at the front desk gave him his key and told him none of the guests are allowed to go into the room across the hall. He agreed, but as he continued to stay in the hotel, he grew more and more curious about the room he wasn't supposed to go in. At one point, he even walked down the hall to that room and tried the door. It was locked. Then he bent down and looked through the keyhole. He saw that it was just the same as his hotel room. But in the corner of the room, there was a woman whose skin was extremely pale, almost a sickly white. Her back was to the wall, so the man didn't see what she looked like. He almost knocked on the door, but then just decided to leave her alone. The next day, he walked past the door again and decided to look into the keyhole. This time, there was no hotel room and no woman. It was all just red. He thought that this seemed really strange, so he went to the front desk and asked about the room. After insisting on an answer, the woman at the front desk told him, "A long time ago, a man killed his wife in that room, and her ghost is still there. But these ghosts are not what you might imagine. They're completely white all over, except for their eyes, which are red."
Story time. Someone tried to murder me on a school trip. So during my senior year, I started talking to this guy that we can call Tyler. And we all had to go on a school trip for a competition. During this, we had to stay in a hotel room and we were all assigned partners. Well, I didn't know this at the time, but I was actually assigned Tyler's ex-girlfriend. We can call her Penny. And when I found out she was his ex, I was like, you know what? Not a big deal. I'm probably just overthinking it, but she had a reputation for being psychotic. And I mean psychotic. Since we were all in close quarters, it didn't take her long to figure out that I was talking to her ex, and she went crazy on me. She basically threatened me by saying that if she ever saw me with him again, I wouldn't be coming home to my family. I still honestly didn't take her that seriously until the next day she saw us kissing, and she left the hotel room to buy throwing knives for when I got back. So when I reached the hotel room that day, she was yelling at me, threatening me, and then she took out one of the knives. Stay tuned for part two to me almost getting murdered on my school trip. So when Penny took out one of the knives, she literally threw it right at me. Somehow it only managed to land 5 inches from me and I was okay. So I took off running out of the hotel room. I immediately went to our director and literally